Brian Norman Jr. has changed trainers, not officially made a change as to who the new trainer is, but it won't be Brian Norman Sr., who coached them through the amateurs, won the Junior Olympics, took them to the WBO welterweight world title, made the knockout of the year by most estimation against Jin Sasaki. But the two are splitting ways. I'll just start by, I think the smoking gun was, there was a lot of stuff into the going into the Devin Haney fight. Norman Sr. very confident in his son, as he should be, which is nothing new with boxing fathers. Norman Sr., who's got 29 professional fights under his belt, knows what he's looking at, knows what he's talking about, and has been in there and done it before. But maybe talking a little too much in terms of even after the weigh-in, still doing interviews, even close to fight day, literally maybe even the wee hours of fight day doing interviews. Maybe taking his eye off the ball a little bit while Bill Haney and Devin Haney were quiet, getting the work done, and then showed out on fight night, November 22nd. But the smoking gun moment was Brian Norman won the first round against Devin Haney. He got off first with his jab. He was the busier fighter who took the lead. And then he goes back to the corner and his dad says, he can't counterpunch. Go in there and get him. Get him, get him, get him. When maybe Norman Jr. was still needed to taste the power himself to see what he's got. You don't know what the other guy's got until you taste the power, not just seeing it on camera. And his dad says, go get him. He can't counterpunch. And then Brian Norman Jr. walks into a counterpunch and then goes back to his corner, which was not very composed the rest of the night. Damn, boy, you got blood, you're getting blood all over the place. And afterwards, Norman Sr. talks about, and Greg Hackett out of Philadelphia touched on this great point. And those two have a rivalry. I'm not taking sides. That's between two former pros who got it on in the ring too. But Hackett, who analyzed the sport really well, points out that Norman Sr., when he says, my son didn't follow the game plan, he goes, no, he did. And that's what got him dropped in the second round, was coming forward against a guy you said couldn't counterpunch, and he counterpunched him and hurt him and almost got him out of there in the second round. That was kind of the smoking gun moment. And now the two, for the time being at least, because father-son pairings have reunited, like Shane Mosley, like Roy Jones. But for now, Brian Norman Jr. is taking the reins and is going to look elsewhere for his head trainer. What was your first reaction to this, Raheem?
My initial reaction when a father and son split is that it's not a trainer and a fighter splitting. It's that the relationship between the father and the trainer and the son and the boxer have come into conflict as a four-peg stool, and something's got to give. There is one of those legs that's weak. Either the relationship of the father and the son is too stressed to maintain the trainer and boxer relationship, or vice versa. And it's really difficult for young men to part ways with either one of those dynamics because they've come up in that system their entire lives, and that their fathers have steeped or heaped upon them their own ambitions. I'm speaking generally now. This is not necessarily specific to the Normans. However, I believe this is something of what we're looking at, supported kind of by what you talk about with Brian Norman Sr. being so vocal even after the weigh-in. And I wish that this would happen after a win. It always seems to happen after a loss, right? But I think trainers who are fathers who bring their sons along oftentimes stay too long, and it's too difficult for the boxer in the son to split and part ways and have the strength to do that, and that stress carries on too long. I think it's a good time for this. Now, the difference here, though, is that most, not all certainly, but most of these fathers who bring their sons up and are in their corner and they're their trainer were not fighters. They just found a way to train their son, or they learned the sport and they were able to train their kid into a position that a lot of kids couldn't get to, and they are embracing their trainer role of their son. In this case, there's a lot more pride, I think, from the trainer being the father in his own role and his influence over his son. And let me give you the short answer now that I've given you the long windup. I am speculating, 100% speculation, that it didn't happen going into the second round. It didn't happen after the knockdown. It didn't even happen after Haney's hand got raised necessarily. It's what happened in the locker room after a loss. It's what we saw in the corner is probably tenfold happening in the locker room, which is the trainer is taking no responsibility for the loss. And the father and the trainer is thinking that it's still time to reprimand his son and tell him what he did wrong and not owning what he, the trainer, as a father, did wrong, either in the corner, in the strategy, building up to the fight and deciding how they were going to fight this thing, or in the adjustments that he didn't tell him to make, or in the moment when they got back to the locker room, what the kid really needed to hear, which probably wasn't where he fucked up here and didn't do this and should have done that. And again, I wasn't in the locker room. I got no tape or no testimony about what was said in the locker room. And this is 100% speculation, but it is supported by what I've seen in the public. I believe that that is likely to be what created this division to a point where Brian Norman Jr. was like, I need to go on my own. I need to be my own man. You got to know what to say in loss. That's more important than what you say in victory. And if you do have the humility to own some of that loss as a trainer and to look at your son as a father and encourage him, build him up even in his weakest moments, and take some of that off his shoulders and be like, here's where I may have been responsible for how things going not to plan. That is the winning type of dynamic, even in defeat.
He was outfoxed in the coaching game by Bill Haney, who went through his own rough night in the Garcia no contest, but seemed to learn and to grow from that. And came back and they're back on their winning streak now. Back to my personal experiences with Sean Porter in the aftermath after the Kell Brook fight. Kenny Porter is not that dissimilar to Brian Norman Sr. These are proud men, and proud grown ass men. And Kenny, every now and then, you could see Sean getting fed up with what you're talking about. He wants to see his dad just admit he's wrong about anything, just to set a standard that, hey, I can be wrong too. You're not always, that in a way of a leadership quality, because part of being the leader of that corner and the leader of that camp is sometimes you taking the onus, you taking the responsibility. And I'd see Kenny Porter every now and then, even in the middle of chastising Sean, training Sean, being like, hey, I got it wrong. You want me to admit I'm wrong, right? Okay, hey, I got that wrong. All right, now back to doing what I'm telling you to do. And then Kenny was wise enough to see that maybe Sean, as he was getting older, was that voice. So you start to tune it out a little bit. Like even great coaches like Bill Walsh, the Niners started to tune him out, and that's why part of why he retired after they won their third Super Bowl with him, and then they won another one with George Seifert, whatever. But he was smart enough to kind of, or was wise enough to grasp that and bring in Barry Hunter midway through Sean's championship run. Sean became a two-time world champion in his second run after losing the IBF title with Barry Hunter, not just as another guy in the corner, but as a legitimate second voice. And he brought in Larry Wade, who's gone on to work with a number of fighters, most famously recently Jake Paul. But Larry was brought in not just as a strength and conditioning coach, but also as another voice, another guy to confirm things Kenny was trying to push along. And that was smart by Kenny. Barry Hunter would come in with his notepad. Barry Hunter had his own experience building champions like Lamont Peterson from scratch and was given a legitimate voice in the camp, with Kenny still as the number one trainer. And in these scenarios where a guy starts thinking of looking elsewhere for corner work, I've always thought the ideal scenario is, Dad, I still want you to be a part of this. I still want you to be the second. Yeah, the second, but I still trust you. I still want your voice. You built me from scratch. And the initial interviews by Norman Sr. was he couldn't go for something like that. Now, we joked about it before we got on here. Look, he's a proud man. Let him have his initial, rant, his initial pride of saying, fuck that. I can't go for that. Why would I go for that? I'm number two to nobody in my own son's corner. But since then, rationale wins out, and that's why I definitely would leave the possibility open that they will work together again. Obviously Norman Jr. is going to be grateful and loves his dad for the fighter he built him into. So I wouldn't be surprised if they work again, because Jack Mosley and Shane Mosley wound up working again. It happens. It happens.
That initial reaction is very telling, though. And you're exactly right. Brian Norman Sr. not only said that he wouldn't be a second, but the rant that he went on to justify why he wouldn't be a second really betrayed a level of ego and self-centeredness about the relationship that makes me believe it was at the crux of the split. I can understand, especially, and this is why I noted that he was a fighter himself. I think that gives him even more investment in what his son is able to accomplish and living vicariously through that son's accomplishments and failures. And so when that moment comes where the son's like, I can do this without you, that I need somebody else to run the show, he feels as if he's losing in his own boxing career again. And not being the head trainer is unacceptable unless you're looking at this objectively. Like, yeah, you're the best dad Brian Norman could ask for. You're the only dad he'll ever have. But does your credentials as a trainer stand up to anybody? I can't be second to anybody? Are you saying that you have those kind of trainer credentials? Well, objectively, no. That's not an insult. That's not a dig. That's just kind of crazy talk to even think that there's no trainer out there that you could be second to. That belies a level of about meism that will be corrosive in the relationship. Even though he's changed his tune subsequently, and I'm sure that was an emotional, immediate outburst that he has rethought, and credit to him for being public about the rethink. But to me, that says maybe for a rep or a fight or two, maybe don't even be a second. Maybe give your son a chance to go do this thing on his own and let him come back to you and be like, I'm missing something, Dad. Like, yeah, maybe this trainer, I like what we're doing here, and maybe I'll keep him on as head trainer, but without you in the corner, I don't have everything I need. That's the way to really gain the trust back and to give your son a chance to see what it is without you. And if what you're bringing is as valuable and irreplaceable as you believe it is, then he'll see that and he'll ask for it back. This is what I hope happens. I like the Normans. I enjoy them with good rapport. I think they're a loving son and father duo. And I, like you, expect that they will find their way back to each other. I hope that they do it, though, in a way that will be very sustainable for the future. Everybody learns their role and lessons for the most optimal success going forward. But I would like to see Norman on his own, creating his own camp, picking his own trainer, out there finding out what it's like to be his own man for a fight or two, and then revisit this relationship and what his corner needs to look like moving forward from there.
Yeah, he's going to go off and, spread his wings. This is that much more as his own man now. He's 24, 25 years old. Roy Jones talked about that on the Joe Rogan podcast once, how that was a big part of it. A part of leaving his father is, hey, I'm my own man now, and you have to grow into that as yourself. And everybody's different, but now he's looking first stop on maybe the tour of finding out who's going to be his next trainer was Derek James. Maybe that, for all we know, they're already hammering out the details of that. Indeed, will be the next trainer. It makes some sense. Derek James is a Texas trainer, so he's keeping it down south, but I think this is just, me. I think what Brian Norman needs isn't exactly what Derek James brings to the table. I think there's some elements of his game that would be improved by Derek James. Every trainer has some strengths and some weaknesses. Freddie Roach gives you great offense and great volume, won't necessarily make you a defensive wizard. Virgil Hunter, kind of the other way around. He'll keep your distance disciplined with good. Raheem's not the hugest Virgil Hunter fan, which is crazy. You're both from the Bay Area, but Virgil will have you boxing, have you using your feet, keeping your distance, but won't necessarily make you as offensively prolific as Freddie Roach. Derek James, his specialty is volume, jab, and conditioning. But one of the things that he's not known for is changing the head slots, having a lot of head movement with your game. And he's on the record talking about how head movement is kind of, in so many words, overrated. You don't necessarily need it a lot of the time. If you keep a guy on the end of your jab and you pivot off with angles, you don't need to do a lot of this and that. And Floyd, who had some of the best head movement ever, he echoed some similar things when I saw him in the gym once. You don't need to be a customato, getting low, moving your head this which way necessarily all the time. But I still don't think changing head slots, being slick, I don't think that's Derek James's game. And I do think one kind of weakness of Norman Jr. is his punch resistance isn't the best. That's not me saying he's got no chin or something like that. But I do think that's not a strong suit of his. That's not one of his standout attributes. So I don't know. I think a guy like John David Jackson is kind of underrated. He still works with Clarissa Shields, but John David is very Hopkins-esque in his approach to the game. His deficiency is kind of like Stephen Breadman Edwards, who's also very good at having you slick and smart in that ring. Because again, every trainer has them. If you don't go their way, they will put it all on you a little bit. Like John David, once Kovalev fell off the wagon a little bit with him, he was quick to throw him under the bus, like that. But I think a guy like that who will make Brian Norman slicker and a little bit more overall crafty is more the fit that I think would add the most to his game, because I think he's got conditioning already. I think that's a check in his box that he doesn't necessarily need that much from Derek James. I actually think he has a really good jab, and Derek James would improve that jab, would make it that much more educated. But just me, I think he needs a guy who will make him craftier and a little slicker.
I think he needs to take his time and select that guy. I like your breakdown of the trainers. I bet you that he will uh, reference his father in choosing that trainer. I think he'd be wise to do that. Like, just because you don't feel like your father needs to be the head man right now, he knows you better than any other trainer does at the moment. He certainly, if he's able to kind of take his ego out of it and look objectively at what you've done and what he's instilled in you, he can find what's missing. If you're able to break it down, Sean, certainly he is, and to a greater degree. So let him help you find that right thing that's missing. When you're trying out trainers and doing workouts, if don't bring him, but maybe when you get home, talk about, how it felt doing this or that, or let him be a part of working through that decision-making process. Possibly. Again, neither one of us are behind closed doors and really know what the dynamic of that relationship is, but I think it's a positive one. They certainly, I believe, both love each other and can probably uh, be supportive together through this process of discovery for Brian Norman Jr. to figure out the way forward and a new head trainer that brings something to the table that he's missing and help him rebuild that confidence. And I think the trainer, I think actually Derek James, who I respect for sure, everybody you name I respect, is a little quiet for Brian Norman. I like the John David Jackson. I think he needs a bit rah-rah. I think he still needs that energy from his father and from himself. Didn't come out of nowhere. Like, it's also attitude, the kind of attitude a gym has and the kind of energy your trainer instills and how he motivates you, not just the skills that he's putting on the table and enhancing in your game. It's all of it, especially at 24. He's still a very moldable fighter, a very impressionable mind, and he's obviously still searching for an identity, literally an identity to be his head trainer now. And so all of that has to be taken into account as well. I'll be very curious and interested to see what trainer he ultimately settles on. We may never know exactly how he came to that decision unless they're completely transparent about it, but who he chooses will say a lot about who he is.
Call, give John David Jackson some run, man. I feel like it's been too
I like
long
that one.
since, yeah, we've seen JDJ have a top flight fighter in men's boxing. Again, he works with Clarissa, but I would like to see my man John David at least get a visit down to Florida. At least give him a visit. So
Yeah, yeah, ring that bell.